Welcome to Staying Hungry. It's a show that we've been planning on hosting for probably 6 years now, where we really wanted to be able to dive into the backstory, the business of owning a restaurant. We're looking to bring on some well-known and maybe some not so well-known restaurateurs of the area and learn a little bit more about their story and what got them into the restaurant business. Back during COVID, we had this idea that came up of really like trying to interview restaurateurs about the business of owning a restaurant. I think it was interesting to really sit down and, really understand how they got started, what they do day to day. And, Mike and I are with restaurateurs, almost on a weekly basis. Yeah. And, they're just very interesting people, and sometimes they're interesting characters that I think a lot of people are always very enamored with how restaurateurs or they think how glamorous their life is, and then in reality it's very different. So,
and I think the reality of it is, on a Friday night or a Saturday night, everybody wants to be a restaurateur because what do they see? Just a busy restaurant. You're like, this is great. I have a place to hang out. But they really don't see behind the scenes and the nights that they're closed or slow, how difficult it really is. So it's definitely challenging, and there's so many good stories out there.
Yeah, I think for the most part, right now the marketplace is very filled with the food of the restaurant, and you have different, people that are tasting the food, rating the food, being paid to eat the food. And I think that the bigger story and the more exciting story is the people behind, I don't want to say behind the swinging doors, what Mike and I always say, because, in front of the swinging door, it seems one way, but once you get to the other side, it's very different. And, I was laughing the other day, there's like a TikTok or Instagram video of it seems like restaurateurs are doing it now, where it's like, oh, here's the impression of people think of a restaurateur, and they're walking into the door, and they have the nice jacket on, the sunglasses, they have a drink, and then it's like reality, and it's like the same guy walking through the door, and he's got like waters and like, stuff that he just picked up at Restaurant Depot. And, I think it's an interesting concept to be able to kind of sit down with these people and really understand what's their history. I think we all have, history of how we got here today. And I think it would be exciting to kind of uncover a little bit more about their lives and how they got here.
Maybe not so sexy carrying in the Restaurant Depot boxes, but I guess really getting a look behind the scenes and hearing from restaurateurs that have seen it all, and hearing from them firsthand how difficult it may be to operate. And the world was turned upside down from COVID, and what it was 10 years ago, it certainly wasn't what it is 5 years ago, and it isn't the same today. There's continuous challenges. So really diving deep and just hearing from them what it's like to get up every day and try to be the best at what they do. So pretty exciting to hear some of the stories of some of the most recognized local brands in the tri-state area. And, just if maybe they can help one of the listeners, that would be pretty awesome, where the challenges that they've seen over decades. Some of the guests have been around for a long time. So we look forward to sharing their story. In 2008, there was a company here on Long Island that nearly solely focused on restaurant hospitality. They rolled up into a larger organization, and it was at that time that competing against them, it was near impossible to swing any of those clients using them for payroll services, over to myself. And I was working for an organization. People say to me, Mike, I love you, but I have no need to change. Well, things started to change heading into the summer of 2008, 2009, where as they went into a larger organization, the service started to decline, which is no surprise. But essentially, having background in hospitality, it started to make sense to work closer with those clients. They were seeking a better service model. I was working for an organization that, just to keep it simple, was completely unappreciated. So started to explore the idea of starting what Premier Payroll Solutions is today and focusing on hospitality. So one by one, and it started to rapidly increase that, while working for this other organization, I was getting more and more clients. And I started to see a void in the marketplace, that there really was a need for a niche payroll company that specialized in hospitality. So Vinny and I were friends in the marketplace, and essentially our partner Stacy was the missing piece to the puzzle as far as running the operations. So coming together and offering this focus in hospitality was pretty simple in what our planning was as far as filling the void in the marketplace. And essentially what led one by one, adding clients to our client base and having a concentration in hospitality. Look, we do payroll for anybody that has employees, but in the state of New York, amongst a few others, there's definitely a significant challenge from a compliance perspective. So that's where we sit in the marketplace then and now, because compliance hasn't lessened. It's only ramped up even further. So between our collective experience at the highest level of management, through our team, we focus on our customer. We even say the words that we offer customized payroll solutions, because no two are exactly the same. Maybe a bunch are alike, but especially in hospitality, there's no two cut exactly the same. So between myself, Vin, having an extensive ability to customize technology solutions, it really has separated us in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think, to add to that, I think the other reason for, I want to say that the success we've had is also based on the fact that we kind of grew up in the hospitality industry, and in different ways. When I first started, I started a valet parking company right out of college with two of my buddies, and I think we were thrown into the hospitality world of restaurants, nightclubs, catering halls, and really getting a taste for what that life was. And then from there, after we sold that company, I got into the payment processing space and also doing a lot in the POS world. So, I think when Mike and I meet with clients today, understanding that we can kind of talk the talk goes a long way, right? It's we're not coming in there kind of faking it, of saying, oh, we understand your business. But I think when we start talking certain terminology, we start telling stories, and then all of a sudden they feel so much more comfortable to be like, this is who I'm looking for, right? I'm not some young kid that's saying, here's my price, here's our services. It's like, price and services are always important, but being able to really understand, what it takes to operate this business is really where I think our success has really derived from. And it's you can't really fake it, right? Especially to restaurateurs. They're unique and, very, at times very strict people when it comes to personality, and you can't pull one over on them.
Yeah, and I think I've joked with some restaurateurs and say, hey, if you have an extra T-shirt or shirt, give it to me, because if you're ever in a pinch, call me. I'll come help you out on a Friday night. Yeah. And I'm only half joking. I mean, I see, not that I've ever been the managing partner at a restaurant, but I've had ownership in a couple of establishments, and I worked behind the swinging doors. So, could I fill in for the chef? Absolutely not, because I'm not trained in that capacity, but I could certainly work on the line and assist somebody. But I think they see just it's a genuine approach, and that it's always a willingness to help out. and that we do have a good understanding of who we're serving. But again, going back to anybody that has payroll needs, of course, Premier Payroll could help them out. But the hospitality segment, it's just not easy, and we say, hey, we'll get in the trenches with you because we understand, and that's a uniqueness to who we are as individuals, and just looking forward to assisting them with the process and feeling like we're an extension of their business. So we're never going to be sitting right next to whoever actually does the payroll process. But if we get it right, they feel like we are. And, it's just a testament to the team that when we get a rating and they're using someone's name saying, hey, Tia does a fantastic job, always responsive, or something to that effect, there's no better compliment. And, we do get a lot of inbound referral business because of our service level, and it's definitely a uniqueness to how we drive our business.
We operate, for the most part in New York, and New York's one of the hardest states to operate a business in. There's just a ton of compliance, a ton of regulations, and at the end of the day, most of these people, whether it's a restaurant or any other industry, it's they're I want to say like neck high in being busy in their business. So when it comes to understanding payroll and the compliance and HR, they need a partnership, and that's why I think we've been successful of being that. We tell a lot of our clients, like, look to us as your payroll department, not as your payroll software or your payroll company. So because they know, they're good at what they do, and that's running a restaurant. A lot of people that get into the restaurant business don't necessarily, I don't want to say like, are 20-year veterans in running a business. Sometimes it's from being handed down from a father to a son, or from a family member, or just, I guess like part of the show of like, you have people that are like, yeah, let's open up a restaurant. Like, how hard could it be? Right. And then I think very quickly the lessons start to get learned of not that easy, right? There's a lot of moving parts to it. So, we really try to emphasize of like, hey, lean on us as much as you need to, because if you don't, you don't necessarily know what could be lurking behind the corner. I mean, we get calls all the time from companies that say, why didn't ADP tell me that I should have been doing this? And I say, honestly, like, ADP doesn't know if you sell cups or if you sell hamburgers. It's a totally different industry, and to them, you're just a number. I mean, so at times, we laugh of where they're saying, oh, well, this company's going to give me 3 free months of payroll. When I go, well, nothing's for free. There's always a catch at the end of the day. Sometimes you really have to, really make a wise decision. And, Mike says this all the time. It's like, you can't be off by a penny in payroll. You can't be like, oh, I'll fix it on the next invoice. It needs to be precise every single week, because if it's not, it could open up a lot of issues.
And I think to add in, recently we were brought in to review payroll, 20-something locations, and essentially the pay frequency was out of compliance in the state of New York. And essentially it was said, well, the payroll company never said anything to us, and they were working together for easily over 10 years. And look, we're not the payroll police. We don't leave meetings and go, listen, get in handcuffs. You're paying out of compliance. But it would behoove us if we didn't say something. And sometimes they go, hey, that adage, if you see something, say something. I part of New York City Police Department. We're not police officers in payroll, but essentially, we will say the difficult things to conversate about. And I think that when they see that it's not an approach of we're trying to sell to our clients, but we're trying to educate, we're trying to make them more compliant. Look, there's a direct correlation of growing our business and retaining clients. So we're fostering relationships, and that's the basis of our company. internally for our own culture and for our clients that it's not ever a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise when someone says, "Hey, my cousin owns 5 restaurants, 5 businesses, what have you. Can you talk to them?" And there's no greater compliment. So, if we continue to educate our clients, it will help us continue to grow our business. And we don't try to be everything to everybody. Sometimes, there is something where we go, "Hey, this is not exactly what we do," or how you want to do it, we may not be comfortable with because it's still wrong, and we may ask for it in writing, or if someone's just plain out not a nice person, essentially, we'll just say, "Hey, give me the phone. I'll call up the big guys and I'll direct you, towards them." So it's not magic, although we've been told you are doing magic in your own way without or remaining humble through the process. So it's payroll. You can't kind of sort of be right. You could get crucified if someone doesn't get paid to the penny.
Yeah, and I think, kind of coming full circle of like the concept of this podcast was, is to really be able to share the value and the knowledge of some of the, the titans in this industry, whether it's locally here, on Long Island, or as we, kind of grow across the country. It's being able to kind of hear little tidbits from these people, and as if you're a restaurateur or looking to open up a restaurant, to be able to kind of grab little nuggets out of it. I think, what kind of made me kind of re-engage in this idea is last year we had a client appreciation event at a Ranger game. We rented a suite. We had, a bunch of our clients there, and seeing them engage together, the guy that owned 2 restaurants talking to the guy that owned 10, looking up to them. But then you had the guy that owned 10 looking to the guy that owns 40 and looking up to them. And it was like, it was a cool feeling to be able to kind of put those people in the same room, and, what they were able to kind of get out from one another was really like kind of made me kind of get off my ass and say, let's kind of put this idea into fruition, even though it's kind of been on the burner. So we hope that's one of the things that we are able to generate from this podcast. That
was 6 years ago where you tossed the idea, COVID-ish. Obviously, it was paused in its tracks, but the time is now. So we're looking forward to bringing this to hopefully the masses, and like I said, if one person can learn from some of the guests that we bring on, that would be pretty cool, and maybe they kind of cross paths in some capacity, and you just never know, just a forum to have open conversation and share their successes and maybe even some of the downsides that they're willing to share. But I think useful information to a restaurateur, maybe starting out, maybe in the business and considering expansion. And it's a new world. This business, the margins are razor thin. So if you don't get it right immediately, your demise might be sooner than later. And I'm sure we're going to hear some stories about individuals that didn't have all success, and you could drive around locally and go, "Oh my God, this and that." But if they open up, I think they're going to share some pretty valuable information to us, and we could push that forward.
Yeah, it's funny because, like any business owner, I mean, I always look at it, we've combined, we've owned a few different businesses, some which people know about, sometimes some of the businesses no one knows about, and the ones that no one knows about are like the failures, right? And I think, I think we learn the most from the failures we've had, and I look back even for myself, and I like shake my head at some of the decisions I've made of starting certain types of businesses at certain times, and just getting ahead of yourself. And I think, for whether it's, the people that we interview on this show, they've had failures. Everyone's had failures, but if you see, like you look at this one place and you go, oh, this guy probably made it from the start, from the day one of opening doors, he probably was making millions of dollars. And, odds are that's probably not true. And it might be his first time and he may have gotten lucky. Oftentimes it's probably his second, third, or fourth try at something. And I think it's going to be interesting kind of digging into those, second, third, and fourth attempts and, what they learned from those, from those stories.
The failures, yeah.
Those failures. Yeah. I think it comes down to just like understanding business, right? I think, I don't think for some reason restaurants just seem to like, hey, I go to restaurants, right? And, I've seen what it's like inside, but if you were, a contractor, you're not just going to like, Mike and I aren't going to be like, oh, we're going to go start building a house tomorrow, right? Like, odds are that house isn't going to stand for too long. But for some reason, I think the sexiness of restaurants is really what drives those decisions. To think like, hey, we just need to hire a chef. And, you hire these people, they make tips. It's not that much money. And then when they really dig into it, the failure, I think, of restaurants in general, of why it's such a high failure ratio, I just think it's usually because like the people getting into that business don't come from that world. And I think, for any other type of industry, you would never even think of getting into an industry that you weren't had any type of experience with. But it's hard enough to run a business with the experience. There's no guarantee of success if you're a 20-year veteran coming into any industry, whether you're an attorney, owning a service-based company. It's tough. Right. And I think in that industry, there's just, again, you could have the best chef and all of a sudden he quits. And now it's like, well, who's making the food? There's a lot of pieces that are very contingent on whether or not it stays successful.
Yeah. And just because you make meatballs on Sunday doesn't mean you should be opening a restaurant. And often, sometimes people are like, wow, your cooking is crazy. And it very well may be, but doesn't have the basis for you're going to be successful in owning a restaurant. So, I think failure rate is upwards of 90% within the first 12 months. So that's pretty significant, relatively speaking to many other businesses. So, we're gonna hear the good, the bad, the ugly. But there are restaurateurs that are out there that have been doing this very well for a long time. We plan on having them as guests, and just asking them to open up about their roadmap, and even asking them about their legacy, because those that are good and have been around a long time, if there's not a family plan, there's maybe not a succession plan in place, and who can actually handle some of these restaurants. Sometimes the face changes and maybe the food changes, and it could be here comes the pun, recipe for failure. But looking forward to hearing from some notables and up and comings on their story, where it started, and maybe just some hopes of what they think their legacy might look like through the restaurant space.
And you could sit anybody down in the guest chair from this business, who those would be?
I would say Guy Fieri. I can't. I have to peel myself away from watching diners, drive-ins, and dives. I feel like I know him. He's been in my living room for 20 years per se. Watching on TV, and I just feel like it's similar to what we're trying to do, is just to try to find out more about somebody's story, their history. I mean, he's there actually tasting the food. His sons are now, joining him and on the show with him. But I would love to meet him because I feel like he's easy to talk to, and certainly a notable. Some may say, he's not the real deal, as far as a hardcore chef, and that very well may be true, but he's definitely an industry guy, and has built a brand. And I would love to chat with him.
Yeah, I guess, who I've thought about recently, because we were fortunate to have a client that was recently just sold and bought by this group, would be Tillman Fertitta. He's, like an icon in this industry, kind of started from nothing. Now he owns basketball team. I think he has, about 600 casinos, about 600 different restaurant brands. And, the one thing that I've kind of taken notice of because we've somewhat been tied into what their business plan is lately, is really being able to like keep the brand intact, right? I think instead of buying a brand and changing it to his specifications, it's, hey, I'm buying this brand for a reason and maintaining it, because I think the history and the following is really important. Like Mike said earlier, is that some of these people don't have necessarily a succession plan, but how do you keep that brand intact? So I think he would be, on a business sense as well, what it takes to really own Restaurant Group from the outside. I mean, he probably doesn't know how to cook a cheeseburger, but to run the business, to make, to keep it profitable and to be able to expand at that type of pace and rate is just, it's very exciting and interesting for me. The origin story of Mike and I was, when after I sold the valet parking business, which, was, I guess, to kind of touch on that a little, it was an exciting business. We started it when we were 22 years old. We were like, sitting around probably at a bar and being like, hey, we could own a valet parking company. We did it in high school. It was a fun job, made extra money. But once we started that business, I guess I quickly realized, like, if I was 40 when I started the valet parking business, I would have probably never started it, because between insurance, banging up cars, the average age of an employee is like 19 years old and they have no work ethic. So when I got out of that business, it was somewhat exciting because, I think like restaurateurs, the weekends are crazy, right? And being tied to the hospitality industry as a vendor also makes your weekends pretty crazy. So, I mean, I remember, like I still remember, I get the sweats sometimes when I think about it. 5 p.m. would be like when every valet parking job started. So it was getting to the restaurant, making sure they were dressed properly, were all the guys there, oftentimes. And if they weren't, your phone would just start buzzing all day. And it would be just a total nightmare trying to wrangle all of those guys up. So after the valet parking business, I got into the payment processing space, which is credit card processing, like the terminals. And, I quickly realized that it was a very thankless job because it was so easy to kind of, I don't want to say manipulate the next business owner to be like, I could save you money, or I could give you this service. And, it was a very like bait and switch type of industry. So I was just like, kind of, as we were growing that business, I was like, what are verticals that we can get into that make the client relationship a lot stickier? And so at the time we got into doing a lot of like the point of sale systems, like in restaurants, like the Micros or Aloha's back in the day. And now it would be like a Toast or a Clover or something like that. And then from there, I was saying, what's another type of vertical? And Payroll kind of came to mind. And at the time, we were like, let's kind of test the waters before we get really involved in it. So we reached out to a local company that we had somewhat of a relationship with. And we kind of, I guess, proposed this joint venture. And they were said, great. They're like, we're going to put you with this guy that just started working for us as your liaison, happened to be Mike. So that's really like where Mike and I met. And I guess as we started to kind of build upon this relationship, we saw Payroll was this great business. The relationship is great. And, the one thing I always say about Payroll is that Payroll is like a service that you speak to your client on a regular basis that isn't always negative, right? Like a lot of other vendor relationships, it's very like, something's broken, you made a mistake, the pricing is too high. It's like I always say, like, when do you call your insurance broker? It's like when the renewal comes up and the rates went higher. Payroll, it's like you're speaking to them on a lot more of a constant basis where you're able to really build a relationship. And that's really why I kind of fell in love with Payroll, because that's the type of business that I wanted to kind of be in. So fast forward a little, we stopped doing the joint venture with this particular company. We decided to kind of bring it in-house. Mike, as he was mentioning earlier, said like, hey, I want to kind of go do this by myself. Kind of long story short, about 3 years later, Mike and I came together. He just started Premier. I came into the fold with the goal of really concentrating on a specific path, right? One of those paths being hospitality. And, I think we realized in going after hospitality that, what clients were really in search for was just unparalleled service, right? Whether you're in hospitality or construction or manufacturing or retail, technology's great, but it means nothing without the service that backs it up, right? So I think really where, I guess, my background and where we kind of came to today, and that's kind of how Mike and I kind of came together. I mean, I'll let Mike kind of tell his story, and how it kind of continues and cross paths.
Yeah, and that's the connectivity through Payroll. My family's been in the restaurant business for 40 years, and going back to similar times, 2008-ish. I was a minority, more so an investment partner in one of the locations. My brother was the managing partner, so I worked with them from time to time, doing whatever to help out. Again, I wasn't the lead role, but essentially, getting my hands dirty behind the scenes, and just having a good understanding of what it takes to run a restaurant, has transposed into parts and visions of what Premier Payroll Solutions is today. Focusing on the client. Then it was certainly the customer, being a restaurant customer, but really I think just success in business is communication. Delivering a solid end product or end service, and really just caring. And those facets is where Premier Payroll Solutions sits in the marketplace. And I think having passion, certainly in the restaurant space, there's no question about it. Those that do, it definitely transposes to the staff, and no different to our business, that we're passionate about it. I like to say that we're not perfect. We certainly strive for excellence, and I think when you do that, it's really seen by your clients, and knowing that when they need something, you're there for them. So a lot of similarities between hospitality space and a hospitality focused payroll company. And time is of the essence in that space, especially New York State. You have to pay your staff weekly. So really, like Vin was saying, there's just a constant and continuous communication with your clients. And listen, clients have different needs. Those that have higher quantities of employees tend to have just more needs, more moving parts. But it's essentially, at the end of the day, the end goal is the same: timely, accurate payroll, and making sure that our clients remain in compliance. And sometimes that's a recommendation outward, where they may have to speak to a labor attorney just to make sure that everything is on the up and up. But again, communication. Those that see us for who we are and what we deliver, they know they've built a strong team around their business, and they're comforted by the communication between restaurateur, ourselves, labor attorney, HR, other vendor partners, because if they can continue to grow their brand, essentially they'll have further continued success. So, Premier, I say we play a small part, but it's a pretty integral part of what the weekly needs are for the restaurant, on the back office end of it. Long Island is a very costly place to operate, and I think as we dig in with some of the restaurateurs, we're going to hear more from them about the maybe more specifics of the challenges of the restaurant and hospitality space, because it's definitely a huge factor, and their margins, like I said, are so razor thin. I think they're going to share with us maybe one of the biggest challenges between the space itself and compliance and labor costs. I mean, there's food costs. I mean, I guess that they'll give us a laundry list of all of the challenges, but definitely something we're going to hear more about as we gauge or get into these conversations.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is after we came out of COVID, I think it forced restaurateurs to be, to have to think about new ways of doing business, right? And I think what we've seen coming out of COVID is expansion of restaurateurs that have the model down pat, right? They know how to build a successful business, and, they're taking advantage of those restaurateurs that don't have it down. And then we see on the other side is that, the government gave out so much money post-COVID to restaurants specifically, between PPP, ERC, you name the acronym, there was money to be had out there. And what's happening now, I think those, I don't want to say unsuccessful businesses or restaurants that, kind of exhausted all of those funds, are now coming back to reality of like, well, can I stay in this space? Am I dealing with those changes? But I think in the same respect is that, technology has made vast improvements. I mean, we see a lot of clients now, like I got a call the other day of where it's a quick service restaurant, and they're like, we're just going to put those, self-serve kiosks at the counter, right? Like to be able to go, let me order what I need to order. Like, why do I need to tell somebody, what type of burrito I want when I could just click, the button? And then, as they start looking at it, they're like, well, the computer can upsell better than a person, right? It's like, all right, I want a burrito. And then it's like, well, do you want a side of queso? Do you want the chips, right? Like they're going to say, or the computer's going to do the things that maybe the person behind the counter just isn't trained to do, is too embarrassed to do. And to be able to offset, I mean, hey, we're going to be the part of that downside to go, well, if I'm going from 10 employees to 7, that hurts us to a degree. But I think it's part of just the nature of the evolution of what the restaurant worker looks like. In order for them to stay in business, they have to really, embrace technology and change, because it's just not going to be able to kind of sustain that. We're not going to spend $50 for a burrito, but at this pace, it looks like, we're on pace to do that.
And
so
reality of it is, yes, that location could have less employees, but if the model works and they, less could be more, right? So there could be upside to it, for us, but time will certainly tell.
Yeah, and that's what we do a lot also at Premier is, trying to understand like what their tech stack really looks like. Like, what are they doing to capture time? What POS system are they using? What accounting software are they using? And being able to say like, can we, create some type of workflow that kind of moves the data seamlessly between all those things? Because maybe up to this point, it's been a manual process, right? Like we had a pretty large Mexican restaurant franchise that they came to us a few years ago, and they said, they were like, you saved us $80,000 a year because I was able to get rid of somebody that went around to all of these locations to be able to grab like some paperwork here, some paperwork there, and you were able to help us kind of take that information and streamline it, whether it's an automation, some kind of API or something like that. And it's just being able to think smarter today and leverage the technologies that most of them are currently using, but they're just not using it to its full capacity.
For anybody that's looking to get into the restaurant business, what would you say is the most important skill set that you've seen in your experience?
Probably being able to walk away, open-minded, in the sense of not forcing it, because I think all too often that happens, and taking the emotion out. And I don't know if that's a skill set. It may be for some, but when you and that maybe that just is in life. Being able to take the emotion out and saying, you know what, does this really make sense? Because it could turn you upside down if it doesn't work out, and the failure rate is so high. I said before, it's upwards of 90% within the first 12 months. So I would say be open-minded and not afraid to walk away, and not, what's the adage? Don't put the square peg in the round hole. Being conscious of that, and if it doesn't make sense, to sit tight and wait for the right moment.
Yeah, I think, like most business, right, but I think restaurants specifically, you have to know your numbers, right? I think because you operate on such razor thin margins, knowing your numbers, and it's shocking, even as a payroll vendor to most of these restaurants, I'll ask, like, what's your labor cost? What's your food cost? And they have no idea. Right. And I think, one of the guests that we're planning on having in the next few weeks, when you speak to him, he knows down to like 28.6% is this labor cost, right? Or this food cost. And, when you don't know those things, it's so easy for the difference to go from profit to loss, right? And I think, reading about like franchises and McDonald's specifically, it's like they know their numbers so well. They know by a base of like how many people they're serving in a given day, then the trend what that looks like determines of like how many people they're going to keep on or let go, because like that labor cost now is the difference between, again, profit or loss. When you're paying, in New York, $16.50 for a minimum wage employee, that adds up really fast. And if you can manipulate, a few hours here and a few hours there for every employee, it adds up.